good evening or good morning, depending on when you are, to everyone. And we're very, very pleased to have a very young and ambitious scholar with us today, Huseyin Kurt. And he is going to present his dissertation topic to us. And the way we're going to handle this, we give him around 45 minutes to present his topic. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A section in which that we will have a discussion over the topics and comment and feedback. And meanwhile, as we always do on Zoom chat box, you can post your comment or question as the presenter present the topic. In the second part, I will try to go over those comments and bring those issues and questions to the presenter. Now, Huseyin, if you can now start and introduce yourself briefly first before we move to your topic.
So hello everyone again. My name is Huseyin Kurt. I'm currently writing my dissertation on this topic and working with my institution, Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts, from the United States. And I'm excited to discuss these issues with you here today.
Yeah, the topic that you choose is really very, very interesting topic. And I'm really curious how you're going to approach to the subject and how you're going to make a case. So particularly, I assume you're going to give some background in terms of, what's going on with the establishment of new republic in Turkey and with this oppressive regime, and while that everyone's struggling to keep their identity and faith. So I assume your whole dissertations go around in this regard, Nursi's movement, to see how he came up with a way to actually perhaps not only survive and to find a way to flourish, and right, while everyone was expecting that it will be completely crushed and disappear. So we're very, very glad to have you, and we'll be very pleased to hear what is your key findings and main hypothesis in this dissertation. Floor is yours. Let's start.
All right, thank you. So this is, I'm rather in my initial phase in my dissertation, so I'm still collecting my sources through oral histories, as well as gathering as much as archival sources, as much as possible. And so I have outlined some of my arguments and hypotheses in the prospectus, as you have read, but I'm gonna go through a summary of my arguments. But I would like to share my screen with you in order to show some slides to facilitate the discussion. Can you allow me to do that? Can you allow me to share?
Yes, you are co-host now. You can do that.
Okay. Yes. So. What is this topic about subalterns and their voices in history? What does a subaltern social history of religious life in modern Turkey look like? This is a significant question in modern Middle Eastern historiography. Most of the time, Middle Eastern historiography is written from the point of view of statesmen and political elites, rather great men like Atatürk and others. But usually common people, ordinary people's voices are either ignored or cannot be found, because those are peasants. Usually they don't know how to read, how to write. They don't usually leave some historical records to us unless we struggle to find them in specific ways. I'm going to explain about my sources in the later minutes of this session. So this is rather a necessity in Turkish historiography as well, and a new trend in Middle Eastern historiography to find the voices of the subalterns and to explain the construction and the development of the Turkish Republic from the point of view of common people or lower social ranks. So I find the case of the Nur movement as a good excellent case to study the common people's perspective in the 1930s and 40s, because it's easier to find those valuable sources on common people through looking into these movements, because they have what I call the Republic of Letters. They exchanged letters with each other excessively in order to keep contact, in order to keep constant contact among them. So thereby we have some letters exchanged between Said Nursi and followers, as well as between various followers from different corners of Anatolia. So sources wise, we have plenty of sources in terms of memoirs, and I'll do some interviews, meaning oral histories with the senior members of the Nur movement, especially with senior women of the movement, in order to figure out those points under the dark. So far, I may discover new findings concerning the internal dynamics of the community. And other sources are basically police sources, intelligence services sources, state institutions reports or to the prime minister or the government, and everyone who works on the Turkish Republic, on the history of the Turkish Republic, knows that it's not always easy to find the sources on, let's say, police department, Emniyet, or istihbarat, MAH, and others. But fortunately, some curious scholars like Badalı or Akgündüz or Şahiner and others, especially the institution Istanbul Foundation for Science and Culture, meticulously tried to gather as much, archival sources as much as possible. And I'll partly rely on those sources as they are precious to work on sources from above. So what is these subalterns? Why subalterns' voices matter in historiography? This is the question, right? And why do we need to understand history through the lenses of ordinary people? These all started in modern Indian history with prominent scholars like Ranajit Guha, Gayatri Spivak, and in Ottoman historiography, Donald Quattert worked on labor history, workers, miners, and others. And this trend is called either history from below or subalterns. And the word subaltern comes from the Gramscian notion of the subalterns. And these scholars, historians like Ranajit Guha, changed into a kind of historiographical concept to work on these lower social ranks of Indian society, to understand how India was modernized, as opposed to looking from top-down sources. So I apply this approach to history of modern Turkey, and I take the Nur movement as the case study to understand the common people's perspective in terms of the cultural experimentations of the Kemalist state in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. So I take the notion of a blended modernity in the Middle East history to understand the mixture of Western concepts such as representative government, popular sovereignty, and with the traditional notions of Islamic ways of life, in order to bring a rather sophisticated approach to understand the development of secularism in modern Turkey. So I wanted to look at the actual practices and perceptions of people as opposed to dichotomies in historiography, such as the modernists, secularizers versus reactionaries or Islamists. These dichotomies or binaries do not help at all. So this is a revisionist study in historiography. So let's move on. My argument is this: Nurjus, with their individual and collective actions, resisted the state's cultural experiments in the first couple of decades of the Republic, and they disengaged with the state in those repressive times. But when they found a good ground to take action during the 50s, they did not hesitate to engage with the state, especially with the Democrat Party, to influence and reshape the secularist regime of modern Turkey into a more tolerant, religiously a more tolerant regime, as well as a politically more pluralist entity. I'm going to read from here. I argue that Nurjus contributed to the Republican values such as self-improvement, self-initiative, public opinion, collective decision-making, popular sovereignty, and the national identity of Turkishness, active citizenship with civil and human rights, including but not limited to the freedom of conscience and the right to practice religion, dedication to the nation, and participation into the collective good. They achieved such contributions to the young republic by their endeavors to adapt into the new socio-political settings under the Kemalist state. Their struggle to survive as a group of pious people in a hostile secular regime, whose ways of life and strong beliefs in the afterlife were at odds with the positivist teachings of the Kemalist education system and public policies, forced Nurjus to configure certain workable but non-confrontational strategies so that they could bypass state intervention into their lives, but to keep public peace for a potential rapprochement in the future with the state. So they did not just passively wait and to hope for a better future, but rather that they did have some serious strategies. This is my emphasis. So they developed, with the help of their leader, Said Nursi, certain kinds of strategies in order to contend with the aggressively secular state, to persuade rather than to topple down, to persuade the state that it needs to change its certain policies on state-religion relations. So this is rather a good case to see another civil disobedience movement in the 20th century. And it can be compared to other parts of the world during the 20th century, where and when the world was turned upside down many times over. So I argue that in their struggle to survive as pious people during the Kemalist experimentation of the cultural reforms, Nurjus not only achieved their civil and human rights, but they actually also contributed to the transformation of the republic into a more pluralistic political entity than before. So this is my general hypothesis. In order to analyze the agency and strategies of Nurjus in their everyday forms of resistance against the top-down imposition of Kemalist regime's civilizing project, this research takes 3 dimensions of this religious movement in a subaltern study approach. So basically, I analyzed 3 dimensions of this movement, which are first, the repertoire of actions. So my question is this: what were the general repertoire of contention among the Nurjus against the aggressively secular Kemalist state? Every movement has certain type of modus operandi in order to achieve their goals. So I outlined their strategies and analyze at the same time their evolution into a new movement, into a new community at the political or social conjunctures, both in Turkey as well as in the world. So this is important. Sometimes scholars categorizes certain movements in a fixed notion, saying that this movement is either conservative or reclusive or political. These are all changing, and these perspectives, these fixed notions on movements do not help understand the historical change within the movement as well as within the society, because they have relations with the society as well as the relations with the state. So I have a rather dynamic understanding of state-religion relations by looking into the trajectory of the movement from late 1930s till 1960. And then I look into the resources, opportunities, and strategies of mobilization of Nurjus. So the final dimension that I investigate is the internal dynamics of the Nur community. More often than not, Nurjus do not find enough information on the internal dynamics of the community until 1960. Neither the authorized biography of Said Nursi, Tarih-i Hayat, nor other books of memoirs or popular historical books on the movement provide this valuable information on understanding the Nurju to Nurju relations, internal dynamics of the community. Why is this important? This is important rather because it elaborates the fault lines of outlooks among various kinds of Nurjus, either living in the west of Turkey or eastern part of Turkey, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of age, identity, in terms of social background, gender. These are all important components of the movement, which in their entirety shapes the nature of these movements' relations with the state, and also it has impact on general state-religion relations. So this is rather significant to delve into. So I have listed out certain questions and issues that I'm going to do the, research on this topic, and I'm gonna read some of them in order to understand what am I looking at specifically. So in terms of repertoire of contention, for example, I will elaborate the non-confrontational resistance of the movement as one of their repertoire of contention. They don't want to protest the state directly, or they didn't want to make uprisings, or they didn't create a conspiratory revolutionary underground organization. Rather, they just wanted to withdraw from the public life in order to bypass the state's cultural experiments and to continue their ways of being, Islamic ways of being in the distant corners of Anatolia. And their long-term strategy was the nonviolent struggle for achieving civil and human rights in modern Turkey, not unlike the movement of Blacks under the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther in the United States. So they had a specific vision and goal, which was the long-term persuasion of the state to accept their excesses in its secularist dogma and to ease its policies on state-religion relations, so that Nurjus can acquire civil and human rights in modern Turkey. They just wanted to guarantee their existence in this new socio-political setting, which is the Turkish Republic. And their modus operandi was publicity, discursive contestation through the idiom of Nur, which focuses on the peaceful elimination of masses, on the interpretation of Quranic text in order to make their lives meaningful in this disenchanted modern world, and enabling themselves to read the book of the universe through the tools that they gathered from the Risale-i Nur collection. So rather we see here a kind of democratization of Quranic interpretation, which is modern. The Republican elites in Ankara missed this point. They wanted to modernize Turkish society in the making, but they missed the opportunity to see that rather Said Nursi was facilitating that approach, meaning that the masses were not receiving religious truths passively from either local or national religious leaders, but they started to engage actively with the Quranic text, with their own intellectual capabilities, thanks to the spiritual and intellectual tools that they acquired from the Risale-i Nur collection. Another thing is the deliberate effort to minimize the political aspect of this community. Now we know that every human being and community or society has some sort of political aspects in their lives. Even we have some micropolitics at work institutions or in our offices. So refraining from politics was one of their general principles, but it would be utopia to argue that they did not have any political goal at all. They did, right, like any other human being and any other community, but they tried to make a division of labor among Muslim communities in modern Turkey and assigning themselves solely the faith problem and leaving the other questions to other Muslim communities or group of people to carry out separately from faith-based communities to facilitate social life of Muslims, or to raise the voices of Muslim masses to political leaders in order to carry out their political agendas as well. But by this division of labor, which Said Nursi envisioned, Nurjus managed to minimize their political aspect, and the broader public, the broader Turkish society, therefore did not question the legitimacy of this community, because they saw that they were prioritizing the afterlife over this worldly life, and this was the basis of their legitimacy. Another question is how dynamic of this principle of refraining from politics. So I also examined this issue. We see that until 1950s, the community disengaged with the state, and then all of a sudden, people sometimes argue, Nursi emerged as a political figure, flirting with the members of the Democrat Party and so on. This is rather misleading. I argue that because this principle was dynamic, not static, because if they saw that there was possibility to work for the Muslim society within the current settings of the Republic, they did not hesitate to move on. If they saw that there were serious blocks, they disengaged. So it's up to their principled outlook on religion and politics. So we need to understand this. This is significant. I also asked questions about compromise. Did Nurjus compromise with the state until 1960? Do we know anything about that? Do we know any clues about such rapprochement? Or why did they not seek international solidarity with other Islamic movements in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia and whatnot? Or international solidarity, seeking international solidarity from other states. So I also asked, was there any solidarity between the Nurjus and Islamic community, other Islamic communities in modern Turkey? So I'm going to elaborate the details of these relationships in my dissertation, but I can summarize my points here quickly, that Nurjus did not seek any international solidarity with either other states, other state institutions, or other Islamic communities. But they actually did seek solidarity from other Islamic communities within Turkey. Why? Why did they emphasize the national struggle over international struggle? Because, again, they did this deliberately. Because they thought that, at least those decision makers considered that any solidarity, international solidarity, could compromise their loyalty to the national sovereignty of Turkish Republic, and they could that could put them under suspicion. So, Talal Asad, for instance, argues in his book that why Malcolm X failed in the United States, but Martin Luther King succeeded in his civil rights movements, because he argues whereas Malcolm X chose to struggle from the discourse of international human rights, he was he didn't get any real support from the international community, whereas Martin Luther King focused on national politics and emphasized a discourse on civil rights inside the United States, and tapping into constitutional sources and the human rights stemming from that. Martin Luther King established a strong basis in American society to seek their fair share in social justice. So these are some comparisons I'll make in my dissertation. And finally, I asked, what alternative did Nurjus bring to secular Turkish Muslim identity construction by the Kemalist governments and state? So they were not passive receivers of Turkish identity making at schools or in public sphere. Rather, they contended with the state's identity construction in re-identifying Turkishness at court defenses of themselves, injecting a kind of religious, a spiritual aspect to Turkishness. And the second dimension that I work on is resources, opportunities, and strategies of mobilization. I look into human resources and spiritual and intellectual resources much more than the financial resources, because really they did not need that much financial resources to carry out their actions. And the long-term, besides the long-term strategy, they also developed a political quietism during the repressive decades. And another opportunity was court defenses. Certain prominent Nurjus preferred to be jailed, but at the same time obtained the opportunities at court defenses to announce their ideas and opinions to the broader public, in order to create a publicity effect, and it worked to some extent. So another another theme is the opportunities of learning and experimentation. So Nurjus also learned how to reevaluate their tactics or methods to reach out people. For example, the increase in literacy rates in modern Turkey actually helped Nurjus to disseminate their ideas around. That was a kind of technical opportunity. Or the failure of the Turkish Republic to provide a symbolic meaning to common people, meaning to provide ethical guidance or hope in a disenchanted modern world, became another opportunity for Nurjus to provide alternative life world to the citizens of the Republic. Finally, I can quickly skip this. Finally, I can say Said Nursi's status as a respected Ottoman scholar was another source, another symbolic and spiritual resource for Nurjus to reach out peasants and other people who lived in the small towns of Anatolia, looking for hope, and rather the public preferred an authentic Islam presented by Nurjus as opposed to the humanist version of Islam by the Kemalist state. The greatest opportunity came after 1945, when the global world order changed. The national context of single party regime had to change as well. So that was the great moment when Nurjus really appeared in the public sphere, because the censorship on press was lifted around late 1940s, and we saw several articles popped up in local magazines and journals. When it comes to the strategies of mobilization, I argue that they have a strategy of maintaining constructive movements with the principle of positive conduct, and they emphasized civil disobedience as opposed to rebellion. The third dynamic that I investigate is internal dynamics. This is the third dimension, excuse me. So I examine contending outlooks, especially after 1950s. We see that there was rural to urban migrations, and this would have effect on the internal configuration of the Nur community. We see that university students also started to engage with the Risale-i text and the community. There were the tendencies of cosmopolitanism as opposed to conservatism in the community in terms of reaching out to new people. And I also question about the Kurdish identity within the movement. What happened to those Kurds when they engaged with the Risale-i? Did they lose their Kurdish identity being a member in the community, I ask, or did they find an alternative approach from the text of the Risale-i to keep their Kurdish identity and survive the assimilationist policies of Turkish Republic, but at the same time to survive the repression of the Republic? I don't have any answer to this yet. I'll figure out this with the oral histories. Most significantly, I analyze the position of women in the community, because these are the subalterns of the subaltern. Since the Risale-i community provided an open academy for common people, for God-conscious life on Earth, I seriously investigate the attitude of women in the community. Did they have any possibilities to make decisions in the community? Did they have any obstacles or limits in the community? I'll figure out these with interviewing like Emine Sungur and other senior women members of the community in the coming months. So finally, I just wanted to touch upon my sources and methodology. I have plenty of resources here to do this historical study. First, the state archives. Ahmet Akgündüz have 6 volumes of these documents. He does not systematically analyze them, but rather collects them into a kind of encyclopedia of Nurcu documents, encyclopedia of state documents on Nurcus, like spy reports or surveillance reports to the Ministry of Internal Affairs and others, or court decisions, court defenses. These are valuable sources, which are not usually available for researchers to demand and find from the state archives. And I have mediated sources, the letters exchanged between Nurcus and Said Nursi. Usually these are ignored or the values of which are underestimated by scholars, because they consider that since Said Nursi selected those letters out of many to be publicized in the Lahika collections, they think that these are mediated sources and thus they are not worthwhile to reckon with or to analyze. But rather, I think that these are important documents to understand the relationship between the leader and the followers. So I have unmediated sources, meaning that the subalterns, in which subalterns have directly expressed their voices without any interference by their leadership. So court defenses are important in this regard. Memoirs, biographies, autobiographies, and oral histories are valuable to explore their own voices. I also look at the local press articles, such as Osman Yüksel Serdengeçli's journal, Serdengeçli, Hür Adam, local newspapers, because usually local newspapers were more eager to publish Said Nursi's material and support the Islamic revival cause, as opposed to national newspapers, probably which were under the influence of government agencies. So these press sources are important to understand the relationship between the general public and Nur community. So this is the essence of my dissertation, and I can take questions from now.
Thank you very much. You actually completed right on time. Okay, so appreciate that. So my understanding here is that so you're at I don't know what is the stage of your dissertation now, but it seems like you identified topic, identified your hypothesis, identified your methodology, gathered some data, and you went through them. So my guess that you are in the writing phase and trying to compile and analyze them and write and defend the thesis. Which in one way, it's a good time to really share what you already have. It's also a good time to really seek some alternative views from everyone. I think that's perhaps what you want to see as the fruit of today's discussion. So you share something with everyone. You also expect someone to really give you some idea that can help you to find better direction and better analysis of the data that you have it. Right? Did I get it right in terms of your purpose and position now?
I would be happy to receive critical comments so that I can improve my dissertation.
Very good, excellent. I think topic-wise is really interesting. My guess that almost everyone will have such question and try to see, particularly if you know the oppressive regime in Republic of Turkey, that you will be curious that how any groups, including Nursi's, manage to survive and even flourish without really, getting into big troubles, though they end up going to jail and exiles. But if you really look at it overall, it seems like it's worked out quite well. And you're looking as a historian, and it seems like your main methodology is subaltern studies, and you follow this approach and try to see how you can get that. But I have personally, I follow the lectures. I have, some question. I want to give floor to the others and to see anyone has any common question. I will keep mine to the end because it will be better, I think. Yes, Dr. Ibrahim Özdemir, please go ahead.
Thank you, Huseyin. It was good presentation in this snowy Istanbul day. It was good to listen to you. Yeah, it seems you are just at this, start of your project. I wish all success to you.
Thank you.
But when you say oppressive Kemalist regime or modern Turkey, I have been reading Risale since high school, but we got the impression, or we are given the impression, only Nursi was under oppression,
right?
And therefore, in the Nursi literature, there was no, universal resistance or voice against oppression to all. You talk about Martin Luther and also others. And for example, now when I was I worked in the Ottoman archives for 3 years, and in the Republican archives in Cumhuriyet archivler for 3 years. When I saw a lot of letters about all people who are just now, it is not uniform, from Nazım Hikmet to Sabiha Sertel to all others, they are all oppressed by the government.
Right.
But unfortunately in Turkey, they don't share the oppression to the Muslims, and Muslims, they never interested oppression of others.
I see what you're getting.
It is difficult for me why we cannot come to a common ground. Especially, I will be very happy because Islam as a universal religion, the Islamic movements in Turkey, they have a universal respect for human rights, a universal respect for oppressed people. What is the reason for that? This is one question. The second one is that you said, the Risale Nur and Risale Nur movement just opened, and it was an open academy for common people.
Right.
We always proud of that. When we go somewhere, we just sit down with, with a layman or, with shopkeepers, etc.
Right.
It's a good of Islamic ethics. But in the long run, I also realized we somehow lost our academic spirit of critical academic spirit. Do you agree with that or not? For example, no, when you go somewhere, it is the rule it is the common people's perspective, not the academic perspective. For example, sometimes an expert, a word claimed as expert on any subject, try to make a new comment about some part of Risale. There is a reaction from the community. They say, no, please, no, keep this for yourself.
Right.
So this open academic for layperson, I think, cost us also to lose our academic freedom to be critical, to come up with new ideas, to come up with new solutions, etc. And I have some other questions. Maybe I'll ask them later. Okay, thank you, Huseyin.
Thank you so much for your questions. Quickly, I can look at the question on the historiography of Turkish Republic in terms of common sufferings by the socialists or pious people or other any marginal groups that were at odds with the Kemalist understanding of the Turkish Republic in the first couple of decades until 1960s, or maybe even until now. So the problem in historiography is that more often than not, we have looked into the history of modern Turkey from the Kemalist framework, which usually prevents to understand the nuances of diversity of Turkey, and which disregards the agency of others that who were deemed as opponents of the regime, or the Kemalist interpretive framework simply disregarded them as masses and or enemies of the state. So what I'm getting at is that unfortunately Turkish society is somewhat fragmentized by the lines of different ideological communities, or let's say by different communities of outlooks. Those socialists sometimes fail to consider the common sufferings of other groups in the Turkish history, and Nursi's considered that the greatest struggle against the repressive regime belongs to only them. This, you see, we are still revising the history of modern Turkey with new trends in historiography, and this is a rather good question that some socialists and Nursi's and whatnot others can come together and write a kind of an edition of social struggles of modern Turkey against state repression. This could be a good idea, but also I don't know the whole literature. Probably there are some good examples of this kind of research on Turkish history, but I think this is a good idea. I'll keep this in my mind. And the other question, about critical thinking and intellectuality versus spirituality within the movement, is a kind of ongoing struggle within the broader Nur movement, as Mücahit Bilici argues that there is a kind of intellectual depression, buhran, intellectual crisis, let's say, within the Nur movement. I think the problem is this: certain people tend to favor spirituality over, intellectuality, because, as Said Nursi himself explains this, that masses look for a kind of religious source for being persuaded on a matter. If they see that an idea comes from a rather a man of higher spirituality, they tend to prefer his opinion on a subject that he does not probably know very much. So this is a kind of problem in the community. I agree with you that we do not usually emphasize the significance of critical thinking in the Nur movement, which actually goes against the ideas of Said Nursi himself, because Nursi argues that don't take my words as given. Assess them, and if you find them valuable, keep them. Otherwise, you can backbite me and send them back to me. So either people read superficially the Risale-i Nur collection and does not engage the serious ideas found in it, or they tend to live a kind of popular way of Nurculuk, or popular way of, they tend to kind of live the principles of the Risale-i Nur in a popular way rather than in a critical way. So because of this, the community failed to provide worldwide famous intellectuals so far. Of course, we have a lot of professors and scholars whose ideas reach out to distant corners of the world from Turkey, but still we still don't have, for example, the likes of Sherif Mardin or Edward Said and Emanuel Wallerstein and others. These names just come to my mind now, but I think the community needs a kind of refreshment or revival of Said Nursi's essential principles to put the Nurju ways of being into balance with intellectuality and at the same time spirituality.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Faris raised his hand, but before that, I saw in the chat box a comment from Dr. Abdulmajid Khan, and I think he is referring to studies on history of India and basically saying the concept of subalterns first get into the literature based on that type of studies. So he is questioning whether it is right to use this concept in the context of Turkey, given that quite different, culture and countries and situation when you look at colonization there and struggle in India versus what happened in Turkey. So what do you think? And I think Dr. Alparslan Açıkgenç also seems like agree that you should think about the use of the concept, whether it's proper or not. What's your view on this?
So yes, although the concept of the subaltern comes from Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist, spent years in jail. So as Dipesh Chakrabarty explains, the interaction between Western cultural values and institutions of modernity with the Indian institutions and cultural norms, in order to argue that modernity does not belong to the West, but we should not forget the interactions between Europe and India and other parts of the world in order to understand the blended modernity, i.e., that is to say, the modern political system and culture in the world based on parliamentary system and other institutions. So here we see an Indian scholar, Dipesh Chakrabarty, explains to understand the cultural encounters between different cultural zones of the world and to come up with a rather nuanced notion of modernity to understand modern India. So by this example, I can say that there is no obstacle to use the notion of subaltern, the concept of subaltern, as a theoretical framework, not as a kind of copy and paste form, but as a theoretical framework to apply to the Middle East, including Turkey. And actually, the usage of the concept of the subaltern in historical studies, including in the Middle Eastern historiography, is already well established. So there's no question against using the concept or notion of the subaltern as a theoretical framework. And the scholars have already elaborated the details and the structure of the subaltern studies on how to apply these to historical cases across the world.
Thank you very much. Faris Hocam, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Huseyin. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I believe that your PhD will fill a gap,
Inshallah,
which is being expected, from international scholarship. And if you go through the Nursi studies, several books have been published and papers. there is a basic concept that being touched is a positive action. In your presentation, I didn't hear any reference made to positive action, مثبت hareket.
I did.
And I believe that it is an important. So I missed it.
Yeah, I did mention the positive conduct.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to remind you that
Thank you so much.
It is an important concept of Nursi studies is مثبت hareket, positive action.
I take it as the essential strategy of Nur community, a long-term strategy in Turkey to persuade this state and the society to have a better state-religion relations in Turkey.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I have some questions, but before that, I'm really curious. Dr. Ahmet Yıldız is in the audience as well. I think this subject is very, I guess, dear to his mind and heart. So I wonder what he thinks about this, given that you really look for some critical comment and contribution. I think he might be one of really a good scholar among us, given his subject area, can somehow give some views. So. Ahmet Hocam, are you available to make some statement?
Thank you, Necati Hocam. Sorry for not visual appearance because I am not in a suitable way for appearing visually. Sorry for that. I curiously listened to the same presentation, and I thank you and congratulate him in his endeavor. Of course, his methodology seems sound, but in terms of the question of Abdülmecit Khan's relevancy, maybe he referred to the presence of caste in the Hindu society. So there is no such strict fixed divisions, class divisions in Turkish society. So there may be some, mobility among classes. So the term subaltern maybe another term may be preferred for the term subaltern, because subalternity, although used by Gramsci, the Western, of course, structure of class is also very strict on, and class mobility is not so, so much higher. There is not so much higher mobility in the Western societies as well. Maybe Huseyin may think upon this, and I will again suggest his close attention to a letter in Tarihçe Hayat regarding the incident of the Tan raid on Tan newspaper, and different interpretations by students of Bediüzzaman and Bediüzzaman himself, which may shed some light on his grasp of tackling with other oppressed groups, maybe, and their way of viewing each other in terms of their ideological posture or standing. And I have a last comment regarding his thesis hypothesis. It seems that your methodology, your theory may seem sound, but still your thesis hypothesis needs to be a little bit strengthened, I think. Don't you think that it's already set hypothesis? We know it from the literature. Of course, the Nurcu movement and later the Nurcu community is an important actor in the formation of pluralization of the public space, right? But this is a well-known, already known fact. Don't you think that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. First question, what about class in my historical analysis? I try to avoid the term class in my dissertation doing my historical analysis, because I am aware that there was no such strict class distinctions within Turkish society, at least until 1960s. Because there was no such massive industrialization of the country yet, and there was no massive rural to urban migration happened in the country until 1950s. So rather I use the term social strata or lower ranks of the society, or the elites, or merchants, artisans, peasants. So I'm aware that falling into this problematic term, class, would jeopardize my hypothesis. So consciously, I avoid the term class, and because I'm not applying a class analysis in my dissertation research. Second, about the divergence of opinions or ideas between the leader Said Nursi and his followers in the case of the Storm on Tan newspaper by some Turkish nationalists. I think there was I think the storm was not organized by Nurjus. Nurjus only applauded this storm just because they considered it a kind of blow against communism in Turkey, and they just wanted to show their solidarity with the state. But rather, as Ibrahim Özdemir previously mentioned, the Storm on Tan newspaper was rather a kind of tragic event, because they were socialists, and their newspaper was stormed by some excited mobs of Turkish nationalists, including Bekir Berk, probably was there. I guess I'm not sure. His name just comes to my mind now. It was likely that he was there, but you see, Said Nursi engaged with his followers not in a total commanding tone, but rather in a kind of cooperating way to persuade them for the greater cause, which is the revival of Islam in Turkey. And sometimes he might have condoned, göz ardı etmek, condoned his followers' actions, or turned a blind eye to certain incidents in order to keep the harmony and unity of movement. And I don't appreciate the Storm on Tan newspaper actually as a historian, because it has some fascist tendencies in there. So in relation to Ibrahim Özdemir's question, minutes ago, I think this could be a starting point to find common grounds in the history of Turkish Republic, in that socialists such as these journalists, Sabiha Sertel and others, whom were highly intellectual figures of modern Turkey at that time, were subject to this violence by Turkish nationalists. But in order to understand these events, we need to look at the general ethos in Turkey. After the change of global order by 1945, there was this communist hysteria going all around the world, and Turkey joined into these anti-communist regimes in the world, voluntarily fighting against the communists. And bear in mind that during these decades, people didn't know what German social democrats were, or what is the difference between the Mensheviks or the Bolsheviks, whom were the socialist revolutionaries who originally perpetrated the revolution in 1917 in Russia, then was hijacked by the Bolsheviks. So there were enormous divergence within the socialist and communist movements in the world. But in Turkey during late 1940s and early 1950s, the common people in Turkey didn't know much about the socialist or communist ideologies or various practices in Europe or in Russia. They didn't know what anarchists were doing in Spain in order to make a socialist revolution. They didn't know the difference of parliamentary way of German social democrats, you see, simply many people had superficial understanding of communists and socialists. Therefore, it was easy for mobs to storm the town newspaper, and it was highly likely, I guess, that the government was in one way or another leading them behind. I don't know.
No, it is sure. No, we have archives. No, it is. There is a lot of evidence. It is orchestrated by what is now called as deep state. I think,
right.
or this
intelligence. Right.
Yes. They are very successful to use some groups against other groups.
Manipulate.
Manipulate them. Yes.
Yeah. So with the last question of Ahmet Yıldız Hoca concerning my findings in my dissertation as being like a redundant study or finding original, bringing about original findings with my dissertation, I bring about my arguments as a result of my preliminary research, rather than sitting on desk and designing a kind of a set questions and conclusions and answers. Rather, this is my initial phase of my dissertation, and I have to have some sort of hypothesis in order to check their validity by the evidence, historical evidence I will analyze in the coming months. So I will substantiate my arguments with the historical evidence I will find and analyze. So I don't argue that these are the hard conclusions written on a stone, but rather they may change or slightly with some new evidence that I can find in the coming months. So, but it's a relevant question, because a lot of times people consider that, oh yeah, we know this story. This is the early decades of the Republic. A lot of movements worked for to bring reform to the state for multi-party regime, and it's all the same story. No, I don't actually repeat the same story. What I bring in this research is that the common people also had the agency to shape and change the policies of the Republic. Not just the intellectual elites like Said Nursi and others, not just journalists, not just political figures, but the peasants, the shepherds, the salesmen, the shopkeepers, even women and children contributed into the transformation of the Republic during the 1950s for a more political, for a more plural political entity, and also a rather more tolerant, religiously tolerant regime of the secular state. So I underline the agency, fa'iliyet, agency of the common people in social change in modern Turkey. And this is new in historiography. This is a new trend, which we still need to do more studies on many different aspects of Anatolian history in modern era. So that's why I call it a subaltern approach of social change in modern Turkey. This is what it makes it a subaltern approach.
Huseyin Hocam, just a small contribution that may be beneficial for your thesis. Do you in the court defenses in 1925 and 43, court defenses are all done assumed by Said Nursi himself, but in 1948, after Afyon court trials, the defenses are made by the accused themselves. So they this may be important in terms of the agentification of the participants of the movement.
Thank you so much. That's a great difference in order to analyze the sources appropriately, because as you mentioned, not just the letters that Said Nursi interfered to select them and publish, but sometimes he also interfered into their defenses. But this is rather understandable, as Bekir Berk, the future voluntary advocate and lawyer of the movement, himself interfered into the defenses of Nurjus many times. And at times he won the cases without even discussing the issues, but by just simply looking into the usul, the methods of prosecution, and claim that such and such court does not have the authority to even prosecute these people, and he won just simply by claiming that. So here we see that yes, there was some interference or some guidance, or maybe some directing of people by the leader, but still we see that the followers or the members did not totally submit themselves to the choices of Said Nursi, as we see that Hüsrev Altınbaşak didn't like the idea that the Risale-i Nur text could be written in Latin script as well. So I'm going to figure out these divergences of opinions among Nurjus or between Nurjus and the leader. And this is rather important to understand the dynamic nature of the relationship between the leader and the followers. Rather, more often than not, Nurjus or others like Kemalists consider that it was all about Said Nursi. He was a shrewd political figure who manipulated the masses or who led the masses to certain directions. But I think this is rather misleading, because there was a genuine interaction between the leader and the followers.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I didn't see any other hand while waiting. Maybe there's other comments. I can now raise my question. When I listen to your presentation, actually when I get even the announcements for the topic, so I thought that you will mention particularly the importance of faith and the worldview in really for Nursi and Nursi movement to survive. Now, you remember very well that Nursi himself states in one place that if it wasn't, because of his faith, you could even have committed suicide because of the extreme level of oppression. So obviously you can say that the level of oppression could somehow, cause everyone to collapse, all those people in the Nurji movement. But when you really look at it, Nursi will not just, let's say, when you look at it, he will not just, in this case, find a way to be patient and to endure this difficulty. He will actually, one interesting thing you'll find, he will convert all those obstacles to opportunities. Right. So it's not that he will change his perception. He will just say, be patient, and then, endure this difficulty. You're going to get reward. Let's say this, he doesn't. So that is mainly that his belief, his worldview, his belief in God, and his understanding that everything is part of big plan, and his understanding that everything happened to him happened for reason and good reason, and for that reason, when he, let's say, was sent into exiles and prison, he said, look, actually the one who sent me in prison and exile is in appearance is a government, but in reality is God, because I made the dua. I asked God to really give me opportunity to live in an isolation, to come up with some things and dedicate myself to the divine cause. But he said that, instead of giving me opportunity to actually have such a life in, let's say, in a cave, then he gave me opportunity to live in a Barlain isolation. And he said that for him to accomplish the level of sincerity, ikhlas, it's like this type of life, it seems like as if it was necessary. If it wasn't such, let's say, difficult condition, he claimed that he could not have accomplished such sincerity, and as a result, he could not have really produced effective works as he did. So, in this regard, I think as he see his belief and his views of the events and the life to really give him a completely different way to overcome them and to turn them into opportunity, I assume the very same things of affect their followers. So I wonder whether you emphasize this point in your dissertation.
Actually, being a historian usually makes it really difficult to talk about fate, F-A-T-E, because yes, we left behind the notion of scientific historical studies. Back in the 20th century, they considered that there was 100% way of doing history, objective history. The consensus among historians is now that it's such a utopia. Historians can do their best, and even they can achieve 80 or 90% of objectivity based on their evidence and sources. That is enough, because everyone has a basis from which pivots his perspective or understanding of the world around the issues he analyzes. But having said that, I just implied fate in the prospectus, but not probably use the word fate, F-A-T-E. For example, I mentioned that the unjust exile of Said Nursi into Western Anatolian hamlet Barla was actually turned out to be an excellent platform to start his initial community and to start his cause by writing the Risale-i Nur text in the countryside, very distant from Ankara and unreachable by the authorities in the beginning of the Republic. So it's kind of called twist of the fate, right, in Western culture. So, but I also emphasized that Nursi used this as a tactic to motivate the followers of Risale-i Nur text by demonstrating them that even the prophets like Moses, Jesus, Muhammad alayhi all, and other prophets had, like Joseph, had difficulties in their struggle, but God helped them in the end because of their sincerity. So just be patient like them, and God will change the stormy winter into a kind of a sunny spring. So there is a kind of ongoing relationship with the metaphysics and the worldly life here together on earth that shows a kind of relation, a kind of constant relationship with believers and the God. But this is rather a kind of metaphysical aspect that befits into a kind of theological study as opposed to a historical analysis. So I leave that aspect to theologians, ilahiyatçılar, rather than to this analysis, because historians, reviewers might seriously criticize that I have mixed metaphysics and scientific methods of historical analysis in this dissertation. So I don't want to find myself in that situation, but I imply that this is how they understood, how Nurjus and Said Nursi understood their ongoing relationship with God, with the Creator, and with the book of the universe. And at the same time, they would have a certain relationship with the general public and the state and among themselves. So actually, the fourth dimension is missing, the relationship between believers, meaning Nurjus here in this case, and God. But I just imply it. I don't want to directly, straightforwardly go into that, because this is a history dissertation.
Okay, thank you very much. Yunus Hocam, I saw your hands. Please go ahead.
Huseyin, thank you very much for the nice presentation.
Thank you, Ajay.
I am not, in history, but I enjoy listening also historical talks. So thank you for that. Now, my question is about secularism. Now, secularism.
Right.
Now, as you remember, Said Nursi, the main blame against him was in the courts that he committed, crimes against secularism. He cannot challenge the secular state. So he tried to overthrow, the secular government. And his response is, of course, hey, we are not doing any such thing. Secularism is, respect to all ideologies.
Right.
That is, the state simply respects irreligion, but they should also respect religion. That is, they should set people free to practice their religion. This is what he demanded. He didn't let's say try to make the government, Islamic or something or whatever. He had, no mission of that kind. So that was the struggle there. And he also, mentions in the Risale saying that, after the 1930s, when he interpreted the ayah, La ikraha fi din, saying that in these modern times, there is no compulsion in religion. People are free. This is times of freedom. And the government, he says, will necessarily be secular, that they will be servants. They will not be in a position to, enforce religion or whatever.
Right.
So his problem was with, I think, oppression, not with the, secular nature of the government. And I feel like if, let's say, he was living in a Western country, for example, US or Sweden or Germany or whatever, he would have no problem with the secular government there. That is, based on, what I read, he has no problem with governments becoming secular and ruling on the basis of the mind, knowledge, reason, maslaha, whatever. He wouldn't call for, Islamic state or something. That is my reading. What is your reading and how do you approach this?
Very good question. Actually, it pushes us to look more behind back in the 19th century Ottoman Empire and the Tanzimat reforms, how state-religion relations changed during the long century of the 19th century and during the second constitutional era. I can briefly explain that the previous relationship between the state and religion in the Ottoman Empire was din ve devlet, meaning the symbiosis in biological terms, the mutual benefits between the state and the religion. The system was working like this. In the traditional Islamic governance understanding, the state was supposed to support Islamic religion, and clerics were supposed to support the integrity of the state in order to survive against common hostile enemies. But during the 19th century, and I explained this in my prospectus, during the 19th century, modernizing reformist statesmen actually changed this relationship into a rather hierarchical structure in which the state grabbed the upper hand and used religion as a modernizing tool in order to secularize the new nation, first the Ottoman nation, imperial citizenship, and during the Republic, they used a civic religion, the humanist version of Islam, as a glue to maintain the unity of the new Turkish nation. You see, it was not rather separating religious sphere from the state, but actually grabbing all religious affairs under the state control in order to claim the national faith of the country, which is Islam. Islam had turned out to be a tool in the hands of the reformists, either the Ottoman reformists of the Tanzimat or Meşrutiyet, or in the hands of Atatürk and other Kemalists during the Republic. So it was rather, this is what Kemal Karpat argues, it was rather the community of Islam tried to regain their religious affair back into their hands so that they could live their religion freely without the interference of the state. So the secularization process of the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish society is one thing, and the dogma of secularism by the Kemalists or the previous westernizers in the early 20th century Ottoman Empire is another thing. Whereas secularism and ideology, which assumes certain historical processes from point A to B, the secularization of the society and state is another story. It's a historical process in which the institutions of governance severed its ties from religious sources to a kind of worldly institutions like parliaments or belediye or other worldly authorities. But secularization does not necessarily mean that people lose all their religious beliefs and whatnot. No, modernity does not mean that modernity has a kind of a unilateral secularism process in the society. This is rather a long discussion, but I can suggest some really beneficial readings, historical monographs to you in an email that you can look at it. But to summarize, to put it simply, I can say that Nursi was a realist. He was not a utopian. Whereas during the second constitutional era, he supported the new regime of second constitutional era. He was rather trying to guarantee the Islamic aspect of the superstructure of the Ottoman state, but at the same time, he was accepting the idea of secularizing the state institutions as a sort of division of labor in an age of expertise. Remember his words on like the tailors, like the Armenians becoming a kind of governor. There was no such obstacle for Said Nursi to see an Armenian governor serving to the Muslim community in the Ottoman Empire, because he considered that as a kind of worldly service to the nation. For him, according to him, there was no such relation between an Armenian or a non-Muslim citizen of the Ottoman Empire serving as a kind of public servant and a kind of disbelief or a kind of un-Islamic threat against Sharia. So whereas Nursi was trying to support the modernization of Islamic governance with the influence of constitutionalism coming from Europe during the second constitutional era, in the Republic, he saw that all those beneficial efforts were gone. Those were the good old days. It would never come again, because the Kemalist revolutionaries in Ankara did not allow any other alternative to flourish in the new Republic. They strictly sticked to the super westernization of Turkey and wasted the rich legacy of the second constitutional era, in which the Islamic superstructure was kept at the same time modernizing the institutions of governance, like parliamentary regime, like public prosecutions, legal reforms, or educational reforms at the madrasa system, or opening up secular educational institutions. But during the 30s, Nursi saw that this was the most energetic Kemalist revolutionary era, and it would continue maybe 1 or more decades or so, until they would understand the reality with the society, that they cannot go against the values of the community for a long time in order to preserve their legitimacy. They would have to change in the future. So Nursi was not a utopian. Just like he explains the situation of the Bolsheviks in Russia, saying in 1940s or maybe 30s, I don't remember, that the political regimes cannot go against the nature of human beings. If there was no competition in a society, it could not flourish. If there, so he directly saw what Bolshevism meant when he was in exile as a prisoner of war in Russia, in Kostroma. Because of the Bolshevik Revolution, thanks to the chaos that the revolution brought to Russia, he was able to flee and escape the camp, and was able to return to Istanbul. So he had opportunities to directly observe what the Bolsheviks thought about society and the state. So just like he had assessment about the feasibility of such a rigid socialist state like the Bolshevik communism in Russia, he also understood the eventual trajectory of the Kemalist state to directly come head to head with these communitarian values of the Turkish society, and had to change itself in the long run. So yes, he had no problems with the secularism principle, but rather he was trying to change the strict and aggressive secularism understanding of the Kemalist state into a kind of rather passive secularism of the sort of like which we can see in the United States, in England, in Netherlands, that the practice of religion were respected, and various sorts of religious practices were allowed, as long as they do not they do not mobilize violence against the society or the state. This is the gist of the secularism, right? In order to prevent bodily violence among various hostile Christian communities in the 17th century, they came up with this idea that, okay, now we need to move forward into a secular era rather than a kind of religious worldview, so that we could all survive peacefully. So yes, Nursi, as a realist, understood the settings, the new settings of the Turkish Republic, and accepted it as a given, instead of trying to topple it, because he probably saw that it would give harm to society or would be impossible. He rather tried to tap into the opportunities of discourse coming from the Republican ideology. You see, after the French Revolution in France, a lot of people didn't benefit from the idea of citizenship because they weren't considered to be active citizens, meaning male, paying taxes and over certain ages. And in the Caribbean, let's say Black slaves claimed to be French and claimed to become free because they argued that yes, we are also French citizens against the French monarchy, and we would like to be equal with you. But they were not allowed. They were not allowed to become free and equal citizens of France. Just like in the same way, Nursi tapped into the ideological source of republicanism and secularism, and played the same game against Kemalists, arguing that, you see, you are claiming that you bring us a new modern life with secularism, but you don't actually apply the principles of secularism to your own institutions and people. If you would like to be a genuine secularist state, you need to leave the masses alone. Otherwise, you're going to lose your legitimacy. So this is an excellent case where Nursi and Nurjus turned the difficulties into an opportunities on the basis of the ideology of republicanism and secularism. Rather than trying to subvert or underestimate the state institutions, they wanted to change them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Huseyin.
We exceed our time by 10 minutes. I saw, Ibrahim Hocam, your hands. If you can make a quick question or comment, then we can close.
Just short comments. Huseyin made very good observation when he said Barla is not a bad place for a scholar. When I took Oliver Lehman to Barla it was a springtime. And when we just get out of the car, he said, "Oh my gosh, Nurju, they are exaggerating Said Nursi's exile. This is an ideal place for a writer to write books."
Right, exactly, for poets.
Okay, thank you very much. Huseyin, was really appreciate. I think it was very fruitful discussion, and we really look forward to review dissertation once you finish that, and we wish you a great success, inshallah. Thank you very much for sharing
organizing this event, and thank you for having me. Inshallah, I will do my best to bring about a really productive dissertation.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being with us today, and inshallah we'll see you next month in the next webinar. Thanks.